Okay, I'm recording now.
Okay. Did it give you a pop-up to say? Okay.
Says you are screen sharing. So let me start. Yep. So just a little bit of an intro. My name is Pamela Jimenez. I'm one of the bilingual therapists here at the Encompassing Center at 3019 West Harrison Street. And I have Jennifer with me. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jennifer?
Yes, Jennifer Smith, Program Director here at the Encompassing Center. Me and Pamela are tag teaming today to talk about grief and loss and kind of collaborate with some of the depression and the warning signs because they kind of occur together. And, we're going to just try to keep doing these series and coming up with different topics to present to you guys and, go from there and get this healing in our communities going, right? So,
yes. All right. So to start off, I think it's important to, really know what grief and loss is, and also know that, grief is something that's normal and happens to everyone. It's a natural response to loss and sadness. It can affect many parts of our lives. Sometimes it can make, the simple things in life, like getting out of bed, feel really hard to do. And these are some of the things you might notice. So I'm going to send a list right now that might be some of the symptoms that you experience with grief and loss. And you'll hear me say a lot of like grief, loss, depression, because in some way, they're intertwined. So you will see a little bit of repetition here.
So, and then also too, just to add one nugget, most people think grief of loss, they instantly go with losing a loved one or a physical person, but we can grieve and lose expectations, things that are like ambiguous loss, where say a person is physically here, but they're not present, where maybe someone went to jail or maybe, they moved out of state or things like that. We can still experience grief and loss, even though it's not a physical death, but it's a loss in other capacities, if that makes sense too. So,
yeah.
Is it possible that I could get a copy of this?
Yeah, of course. Okay, definitely. Great. Yeah, I'll definitely ask for your email at the end, and then I'll, send that information your way. But yes, like Jennifer said, I know in the previous presentation, we also talked a lot about COVID and how, COVID is also a way of what a lot of people grieve, not only, because they have lost some people, but also because it's changed a lot of how our lives used to be. But
grieving the way we move, like being able to just get up, go to a restaurant without having to deal with masks and wait lists and reservations or going outside just to be free without the risk of, risking your life, like going to work, going to school, those things, we lost a lot of that stuff from our day to day. And people don't think that as grief and loss because it's like, oh, it's a job, you can get another one. And it's like, that's as insensitive of saying, yes, that was a father, you can get another father figure. Like, no, it's a loss. So
yeah, definitely. And, some of the things that you will feel with these emotions are, shock, some disbelief, pain, whether it's physical or psychological, a lot of sadness, longing, anger. So a lot of sadness, can turn into anger as well, resentment, regret. There's a lot of guilt, whether it's about the past, about not spending time with a person, or even about the future. A lot of guilt about, I'm really happy, but this person is not here with me, or, I wish they can experience this happy part with me as well. You may feel abandonment, anxiety, and you may worry a lot or have some issues with your memory as well.
And two thoughts with the suicidal thoughts. Sometimes they can be passive too, where a person may not have a plan, but they may feel this way. Like, if I die tomorrow, I don't care. I don't care if I drink 6 beers and pass out, like, and people can be concerned that all is a part of that pain, that physical, psychological pain. And then one thing about the guilt too, it's interesting about the being happy about the future. And we talked a little about this before the recording, how people grieve differently. And it looks like that person is not sad because maybe they're doing things that look like they moved on or moving on, like, oh, they're not crying, they're doing all these things, and then the person feels guilty because their grieving process looks different. So we have to be mindful of that too. So
yeah, definitely. And I included on the slide a little, we call them like emotion wheels, just to show like, you know, where your emotions may be. As you see, the darker the color that it is, the more intense that emotion is. So if we see rage, you know, that's the most intense emotion of anger you can feel. But it sometimes can just start as annoyance and then turn into anger and then just complete rage. So, you know, we don't just start with rage in the beginning, but it escalates further and further to there. Next slide. So we also have changes to thought with grief and loss. So how do these changes look like in our thoughts? We may be a little bit confused. We may have difficulty with concentration, you know, whether it be at work or with anything we're doing. It just gets hard to pay attention to certain things. Like I mentioned before, disbelief. Some people may actually also experience hallucinations where they're hearing or seeing things that aren't there. And also, you know, being preoccupied that with this loss. And also sometimes I have clients who come into me like, man, like now this has made me really like thought about like my future deaths or if I will get sick and also die soon. But these are just very normal thoughts to have, especially when going through these emotions.
Mm-hmm. And one thing with the hallucinations, sometimes we have to be careful with those too, because we have to think about cultural things as well. There's many people that have religious beliefs or cultural beliefs where they feel and see or hear their loved ones. And we have to take that into account before we just go ahead and be like, oh, they're mentally ill. We have to make sure that there's no substance use, because people will cope with the drugs or alcohol to cope with that pain, to make sure those hallucinations is not based off of some kind of hallucinogen or a substance. And then also, you know, determine if, you know, if this loss that's traumatic for them is causing someone to have a psychosis, which is like a break in reality where now there's other things going on that because of this loss has triggered these other things. So someone could have full control over their maybe bipolar and experience this severe trauma. And now they're using substances to cope, but that's messing with their medication, therefore making their mental illness worse. And so now they're manic, and now you're like, oh my God, they're all over the place. And it's like, it's a residual effect that can be linked back to this loss. So yeah, just have to be careful when we're looking at that.
So we also need to make sure that we're looking out for changes in our body when we're experiencing, whether it's depression, grief, and loss. People who, you know, are going through depression may have a weakened immune system, low drives. You know, same with the anxiety effect. You may feel a lot of fast heartbeat, constricted blood vessels. You may be really tired, or even if you're really tired, sometimes it's hard to go to bed, or you're only getting 3 to 4 hours of sleep at night because, you know, the sadness is not letting you sleep, or sometimes it's sleeping too much where you can't get out of bed. You may have a lot of headaches, dizziness, tightness in the throat or chest. There's somatic symptoms, which is hyperventilating, nausea that may be coming in your stomach, shortness of breath. And then there's some people who do gain or lose weight just because they either, you know, don't get hungry because they're really sad, or they decide to, you know, snack a lot to deal with their sadness. But these are all, you know, various symptoms that may happen to our body when we're going through a lot of grief and loss and depression.
Mm-hmm. And that's why talking about depression is so needed, because if you look at this list, we can probably link these to a lot of health conditions and a lot of conditions that are known to people of color as well. So our Black and Brown communities, you know, we see heart attacks, we see high blood pressure, we see, you know, obesity, we see things like tightness of chest, anxiety. Is it a stroke? Is it asthma? Are we depressed and having somatic symptoms? Think about little kids who don't want to go to school. Like, my head hurts, my stomach hurts. And it's like, you know, they get yelled at and forced to go to school, and people think they're faking it just because they don't want to go to class, and they could be depressed, you know, where they're like, I don't feel good, and it's coming up in physical symptoms that we need to check out too. And that's why I think it's so important that we go to our doctors and utilize a primary care physician. If you don't have a doctor, I highly recommend you getting one, because that's your best entryway to other providers, and they should be asking you about mental health stuff, because we're quick to go and we say, oh, this is what's going on. We get medication, and then we're not addressing the root of where these things are coming from. I'm not sleeping. Okay, here's some Xanax. And it's like, but have you asked me about what's going on in my life? And having that doctor really explore who you are as a person, so we can determine, okay, is this just health, or is there other things like depression, which we don't want to claim depression. We rather say we have high blood pressure before we will depression.
Right.
And we definitely have to work better in making sure that we're ruling out certain things, because these can be medical conditions, but they can become worse with depression symptoms. So
yeah, definitely. Also changes in what we do. So what can depression do in our behavior? How can it change? Crying spells. Alan, I know you mentioned you haven't cried, but don't worry about it. You do not have to cry, like Jennifer said, to, you know, feel sad in any way. There's excessive activity. This is something I see a lot with my clients, where, you know, they're working over 60 hours a week in order to not think about, you know, something painful, or like it's a way to avoid a lot of these emotions. So this is something that it may look like. People seem a little bit more, you know, irritable or aggressive, and it all just stems back to the sadness that's causing, you know, these angry feelings. Loss of energy, like I mentioned, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning, or you just may not feel like, you know, going for that 30-minute walk you usually go to every day. Loss of interest in enjoyable activities. You know, maybe you like to, you know, plant, or you have a garden, but you don't find that fun anymore. And it's usually, sometimes this is a sign of depression or grief and loss. There's restlessness or trouble sleeping, because, you know, whether your mind's racing, you may find it hard to fall asleep.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to see these over a collection of days and over time. Because one thing we want to be careful with is we don't want everyone thinking like, oh my God, I'm depressed because I felt all these things. I mean, I can have a bad day and not have energy and feel like I didn't sleep and don't want to do anything for today. That doesn't automatically make me depressed, but when you start seeing these things and it becomes excessive, it's over an extended period of time, and it's definitely impacting my functioning, where if I'm crying and I can't get out of bed, and I'm at risk of losing my job, I'm losing interest in everything, that I don't want to hang out with, you know, something simple as my best friends that I'm used to see every week. Or now I'm just so excessive that now I'm making these things worse, because if you're not sleeping, you're going to be irritable. If you go days at a time, not sleeping, you can start hallucinating and have delusions and things like that, because your brain needs to rest. Having that excess activity where now you're putting yourself at risk because you're kind of all over the place. Now we're starting to worry, like, okay, now I'm a little worried. Let me check in on my friend, or let me check in for myself, because now this is impacting my functioning. So
yeah. And I think that's, you know, really important when Jennifer said, like, keyword here is, you know, make sure this depression or grief and loss is, I think on the DSM it says at least 6 months or more, that, you know, these feelings are ongoing and sadness keeps occurring. But yes, if you feel like it's affecting your life, it definitely is something to look out for. So yes, so a little bit to talk about what we just said. So depression is different from typical sadness, and where you're experiencing it most of the day, nearly every day. It's, you know, less pleasure. It's, you're not doing most, if not all, your fun activities. And this is happening every day, Also, individually, clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. The symptoms must also not be a result of substance abuse or another medical condition.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I think of alcohol, like certain drugs are downers. So yes, in the moment, people, as they say, turn up or have a drink and you're feeling good. But at the end of the day, it's still a downer and it's going to make you feel worse once you come down from those highs or those euphoric feelings that substances give you. So we also have to pay attention to when we're using certain substances to cope. To know that. I know certain people definitely use medical marijuana to cope, and sometimes the feeling that comes with that, especially if it's given for pain. I have a client who uses it for pain, but then it makes them feel depressed and sad because they're not able to do a lot of other things. So we have to make sure we're addressing substances and making sure that's not, above the fact of the depression piece. So
yeah, for sure. So what can we do? So we talked about all the symptoms, but now what can we do to help with, grief, loss, and depression? So it's always important to start now and build healthy habits, whether that's staying active, cutting back on alcohol and other drugs, good sleep, good diet, because once we have that established, it could be a lot easier to get back to it and really help us, get out of this era of sadness and depression. Get back into life, whether that is, doing things that you like to do for fun, getting out of the house, spending time with family, friends, or those people that you really, enjoy being with and that they can make you happy is really important. Remembering the good times, this particularly is for the people who have lost somebody. Remembering the good times that you had with those lost, those your loved ones who have recently passed away and how they impacted you. Find ways to celebrate their life, whether it's, a get together or some art or writing a post about them, will definitely help you feel a little bit better if you remember the good times you had with them. And also, but very important is to take it easy on yourself. It's okay to cry. It's okay to give yourself a break. It's okay to ask for help if you need it from other people. But you definitely need to make sure that, you're okay first.
Yeah, with all these things, it feels a lot and it can be overwhelming just looking at this list, like especially when you're in a depressed state, like where do I can't even get out of bed, let's know getting into these things. And I know like with using substances, it's not that easy to stop or quit, using things that can make depression worse, but we're all about harm reduction, where it's like, okay, if you've had 6 drinks this week, how do we take it down to 4, where, we don't want people ever going into a situation where they're putting themselves in the hospital, where they're making them sick, going through withdrawal, things like that. Finding baby steps, also celebrating, doing memorials and things like that in our homes, like finding little spots to, put a picture up to celebrate the person that we've lost, or, journaling things that isn't a person, but maybe things on just writing out how we feel is definitely important too. And I think we're so hard on ourselves all the time. Like, I think we have to learn how to give each other grace because, there's so much stigma of the superwoman, the Black woman gotta have she's got a parent, she's got to do all these things, all these million roles, that we don't take time to take care of ourselves. Or even the man, like, you're not being a man if you cry, or, you got to be a man. Like, you got things to do. You got your community to impact. You got your household to take care of. And it's like, yes, we get it. Yes, the man is definitely supposed to take care of his community and house, but he can take time for himself too, because how are you going to show up? It's like the airplane. What do they tell you when you get on the plane? You put your mask on first, then you help the person next to you. you can't be the man for your community and for your house if you can't be the man for yourself. And that's taking time to say, hey, I need a break today. I need to take time today. I need to cry today. There's a huge stigma that men don't cry, and that's the hugest lie on the face of this earth. But we have to also be gentle and be okay to allow men that space to cry. You know, we got to be able to let a woman know that she doesn't have to be superwoman. Like, it's okay to ask for help, and you're not less of a woman if you have to lean on your support. So
some things to consider. While it's normal to feel sad after a loss, major changes in life, or adjusting to the impact of trauma, the feelings associated with grief and loss should be temporary. Sometimes the feelings last longer, or you may have trouble dealing with your emotions. When this happens, grief can turn into depression. And we've kind of talked a little bit about this as well, about, some things to look out for, and when, grief and loss may be a little bit too much, where it can turn into depression. So for depression, what is the definition of depression, or what is depression? Depression is a common and debilitating mood disorder, more than just sadness. It's a response to life struggles and setbacks. Depression changes how you think, how you feel, and how you function in daily activities. It can interfere with your ability to work, study, eat, sleep, and just enjoy your life. The feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness can be intense and unrelenting, with little, if any, relief.
Keyword common.
Mm-hmm.
People think, oh, that doesn't apply to me, but it's more common than we give it knowledge for. So
yeah. And just a little recap of, some of the symptoms or things or feelings we could be feeling. Feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, loss of interest in daily activities, your weight changes, whether you gain weight or lose weight, your sleep changes, whether you sleep too much or sleep too little, anger, loss of energy, self-loathing, reckless behavior, trouble concentrating, and unexplained aches and pains, whether it be your neck, your stomach, your head. That definitely does come with a lot of sadness and grief. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some types of depression. So we have, the most typical one, which is major depression. A typical depression where some people can still seem a little happy, but, definitely be depressed, or there's have some feelings and emotions of where, they're doing good, but they constantly still feel depressed. Then there's dysthymia, which is recurrent mild depression. And dysthymia, usually, you have it when it's been going on for about 2 years, I believe, or more. Mm-hmm. That's when dysthymia is
2 years or more. Mm-hmm. This reoccurring depression, but it's so mild, you may not pick it up. Like, it's not a flagger to be like, something's going on, but some people may stereotype it like, oh, walking depression, where it's like you can get to work and go to work every day, but you're having some of those symptoms that we listed.
Definitely. And then one we see a lot during this time is seasonal affective disorder, which is, people who sometimes will get depressed because we don't have enough sunlight, or it's just really dark and cold out. And, but we do see it around during winter, like December, November, January, February month, where people do tend to get a little bit more sad when it's colder and darker out.
Mm-hmm. And there's interesting enough things you can purchase to have in your home. Like there's sunlights that people can have in their home to give you that light that you need. And that's all biological. So that I think helps us to be like, okay, there's not something we're doing wrong or something broken with us, but the fact that natural biological things in nature can impact our mood is like amazing to know. That we can get those things just to be well, like as simple as a lamp or plants, or opening a window, or just going on a vacation if we can afford to do that. So
for sure. So when to seek professional help. So a good time to seek professional help is when family and friends and positive lifestyle changes aren't just enough, where you're getting the support, you feel like you're eating healthy, you're sleeping well, but you're still sad and feel like it's really affecting, whether it's your work or just your relationship with other people, that could always mean that it might be time to see a mental health professional. Some options can be, counseling, group therapy, group work, whether I know not everyone, would like to take medication, but medication is definitely an option. Seeing a psychiatrist or your doctor to get these medications. And like we mentioned, support groups. Maybe a lot of people find it very beneficial to be around other people who may be going through similar things. So if somebody, is going through also grief and loss, there's definitely some support groups that deal with people recently losing a loved one. So, yeah.
Yeah, and counseling could be a variety of things. There's a lot of activities that are therapeutic in nature. Pets are very therapeutic. Doing things with plants can be therapeutic. Dance, art. There's new modalities of therapy that are becoming popular in this day and age. So like drumming circles, things like that, that can be very healing. So it's not, you may not have the words to say, or you may not feel comfortable talking and sharing. But there's so many things you can do, and there's so many different versions of therapy as well. And that's when you speak to, you shop for your therapist like you would shoes to see what's the best counseling fit for you, because there's so many options to do that. And then like with medication, people, again, there's this stigma, like I'm going to be addicted. Medication is not always forever. People can have the option to use it and wean off medication. Medication do the similar effects as if it was taken for anything else, health-wise. So I think of like diabetes, you take your insulin, you do things like that. And there's no question, sometimes people need to take medication to help, increase serotonin and dopamine, which are chemicals in the brain, because our brain is an organ too. It's the third largest organ. We take care of every other organ. We see our cardiologist, we see our ophthalmologist, we go to all these different providers, but we forget that a psychiatrist is a medical doctor that is knowledgeable in the brain, just like your cardiologist is knowledgeable with the heart. And we forget that. We take our brain and put it on a whole different platform as it's not a part of us, but we need that brain to work and function because it's the executive organ that tells everything else what to do and how we feel and cope and things like that. So we definitely need that in support groups. There's so many different types of support groups. There's peer groups. There's, a website meetup where you can Google in this app groups that you are looking for, and they tell you where you can find where people are meeting up at the local coffee shop to do a book club or things like that. It doesn't have to be centered around just like, okay, a grief and loss depression group. But if it's something that you love, like say, knitting was something that helps you calm down and make you feel safe, you can find a knitting group, and that can be very therapeutic for you. So it doesn't always have to be just concrete, like you need to see a shrink and a therapist sit on a couch. No, you can go to a men's drumming circle and go to a support group of buddies that watch the football game, and and then you go work with your doctor to find a psychiatrist that you guys can work together to get your medication. So that looks very different than trying to cope on your own. So.
And that's pretty much it. Here's some of our references. And yeah, that's all.
Yeah, so we can use this next few minutes, 10 minutes or so to kind of open the floor. Alan, if you had questions or comments, I know people will probably watch the recording. If you wanted to give some thoughts and feedback for whoever may be listening to this, your own story or, what you've learned. I know you've sat with us plenty of times and probably have heard a lot of this information over again. So if you wanted to share something, you could too.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of times I wonder if I have depression because I have terrible sleep habits. I went to bed this morning like about 4:30 and got up about 8:30. you know, and that's usual. So I don't really get enough sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I used to weigh 230 pounds. Now I weigh about 150. Mm-hmm. So I lost a lot of weight, and the doctors don't know why, you know. Mm-hmm. So, but I wonder about if I'm depressed.
So let's go with the sleep. How is it impacting your day? So you got to get up at 8 o'clock. Are you feeling restless throughout the day? Do you feel like you can't concentrate, things like that throughout the day? Or are you pretty okay with your functioning?
Okay, yeah. Now, I'm retired, so I don't have to get up. Okay. I mean, you know, unless, you know, if I don't have something to do, I can just sleep until I wake up. Mm-hmm. So, and then at night, I mean, I don't have to get up in the morning, so I don't have to go to bed. So it's not a big deal to me. And then most days,